the criminal justice system, sexually based offenses are considered especially heinous. In New York City, the dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Special Victims Unit. These are their stories. So imagine an episode of Law & Order SVU opening, or any crime show really, and the crime is happening, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is a rape. And the woman is thrown out of the man's room, she's distraught, and goes to find her brother. Her brother is furious, so he brings it to the proper authorities. But as you find out, the man who raped this woman is the son of the man in charge, so they do nothing. It's then further revealed that the man who raped the woman is her half-brother. And then at the end, the plot twist is revealed that this is all taking place in the presidential family, and the president has done nothing concerning the rape of his daughter by his son. This is the gravity of the situation presented in 2 Samuel 13. David's daughter is raped by her half-brother. Now, this past summer, I was living in Cambodia and serving with missionaries, and we were doing this ministry every Saturday morning where we would have a Bible study with the young women I was staying with. And we were going through a series of famous women in the Bible. And one of the weeks we just so happened to talk about Tamar. Now, this is not the Tamar from Genesis who tricked Judah into marrying her. Rather, this is King David's daughter, Tamar, the beautiful princess of Israel. So here we are, sitting around a table, there's about 10 of us. It's hot, it's sticky, there's mosquitoes biting us. It's not very comfortable. And the story we were reading certainly is not comfortable. As we read Tamar's story, one thing became apparent to me. The girls were not happy reading this story. And quite frankly, I don't think anyone really can be. And once we started the discussion, I asked them what they were thinking. Now, I expected them to say something along the lines of indignation at the way that Tamar is treated. Cambodia is a leading country in human trafficking and prostitution, after all. But instead, they surprised me. They weren't thinking about Tamar. Instead, what they wanted to know was, why did David do nothing? Why did King David do nothing? I want us to contemplate that question as we dive into the story. And so this story takes place in 2 Samuel chapter 13, and I'll be reading verses 6 through 21. And up until this point, Amnon, son of King David, has pined after his beautiful sister Tamar, but to no avail. But then his friend Jonadab comes up with a plan for him to finally get Tamar, and this is where the story picks up. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down, and she took dough and kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into my chamber, that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said, "Come lie with me, my sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her. And being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called to the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now, she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now, hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. So there's a very unavoidable truth in this passage. A woman is raped. There's no getting away from that. This is not a story that is Sunday school approved. I don't tell this to my kids in children's church. This is not on anybody's list of inspirational Bible verses. This is raw human condition, and it is important. I'm honestly furious when reading this passage. I mean, my compassion for abused women flares up. How dare he? How dare he? But just as the girls in the Bible study pointed out, the most intriguing question that I have when reading this passage is, what about David? King David, one of the most beloved Bible characters. How could he just sit by and do nothing when his son commits such a heinous crime against his own daughter? He's merely angry. As I'm sure you've caught on by now, we're not dealing with cute little shepherd David or heroic giant slaying David. No, this is David as a dad. And let me tell you, it's not nearly as inspirational. There's a reason there aren't parenting books that draw from David's life. Now, I read several commentaries trying to get to this answer of why David did nothing. And what I ultimately found was that it all goes back to David and Bathsheba. Now, we know the story. David is king of Israel. He's in charge of everyone in the kingdom. Everyone is looking to him for leadership. But ultimately, he fails by sleeping with Bathsheba and having her husband killed. And he doesn't even have a repentant heart immediately afterwards. It only comes about through the prodding of Nathan. So when we look at this story of Amnon and Tamar, and to see the outcome of what happens, we see that Amnon is killed by Absalom. Absalom was furious at the way that Amnon treated his sister Tamar, and felt that the crown prince was not fit to lead Israel. And we have to keep in mind that once Amnon was killed, Absalom was next in line for the crown. The rape of his sister is ultimately the springboard that leads to Absalom's rebellion, because he starts to see the failures of David. David was not able to do anything when Amnon sinned because he himself had just several chapters previously sexually sinned with Bathsheba. How could he discipline his son for a similar sin? Like father, like son. Now, David clearly loved his sons, but he was powerless to stop them because of his own weaknesses. David does not even comfort his daughter after her rape, and I find that difficult to reconcile with the picture of David that I normally have in my mind. We hear in Tamar's very own pleas that Amnon that David would act. He would have Amnon marry Tamar in order to prevent such a horrible sin. But after the fact, David does not even consider redeeming Tamar's honor by having Amnon marry her. As horrible as it is to imagine, in Israelite law, a rapist was supposed to marry the woman he rapes in order to keep her from an even worse fate of being a social outcast. So Tamar was pleading for this outcome, but the king did not even enforce the law on his own children. So this whole situation sort of brings to mind this issue of the human condition. And an interesting topic that we've been talking about in systematic theology is this concept that sin is a failure of community. And this is very apparent in David's life. When we sin, it's not just about us. It oftentimes has ripple effects throughout our entire social spheres. And if we're ministry leaders, that can be detrimental. David failed his children but let it never be said of us that we failed our congregations. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make us hate David or feel guilty if he's one of our favorite Bible characters. I myself have as my Facebook bio that I'm a woman called after God's own heart, just like David. David is such an important character because he so obviously fails, but he still looks to God, and that is commendable. But when we look at the way that he handled his children, I don't think that we should follow in his example. David was supposed to be held to a higher standard as the king of Israel, and we as ministry leaders are held to such a higher standard. James 3:1 says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness." Pastors and missionaries are often in the spotlight, and our actions are more obvious to the people we're ministering to. How can we expect to hold our congregations to high standards if we ourselves are not held to high standards? Do we sin so that grace may abound? Certainly not. But just as David was unable to discipline Amnon because of his own weaknesses, it is often difficult for ministry leaders to have authority in an area that they themselves struggle in. These weaknesses in ministry can take the form of lying, pride, sexual sin, plagiarism, money investment, etc. I know that for myself, I struggle with pride. And how can I have a ministry where I can teach people how to be humble if I myself cannot demonstrate that to them? Honestly, this seems to be a huge problem in the church. I Googled the phrase fallen pastors list and came up with over 2 million hits. This is a well talked about subject. I'm sure we've all heard about a pastor or ministry leader who has fallen. Mark Driscoll from Marsville Church comes to mind. So let's be real. The world is looking at church leaders and waiting for them to fail. But since we are young, let's learn from the mistakes put before us and strive to have a ministry that is founded on Jesus Christ and that breaks the strongholds of temptation. It's not easy to avoid sin. We don't wake up in the morning and are eating our breakfast and think, wow, I really hope I don't encounter temptation today. It would really suck if I sinned. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen when we're eating our cereal. Temptation comes at us in our weakest moments, and it comes when we've already decided to not spend our time with God. Oftentimes it comes when we are alone and left to our own devices, just like David and Amnon. So this is where accountability can come into play. It is a great idea to have an accountability partner, especially when we're in ministry. Not only is this a great example to the people we are ministering to, but it can keep us on the right track. So get accountability partners. Stay focused on God through prayer and the reading of Scripture, and read the hard stories in the Bible and learn from them. Now, is it possible to be forgiven for a moment of weakness? Absolutely. But how much more effective can our ministries be if we focus on staying accountable before our ministries even begin? When ministry leaders sin, it can cripple their ministries. So don't let a weakness in yourself become a weakness in your ministry. I think that another aspect of this is that it's also critical to repent immediately if a sin is committed. As we see with David, it took some prodding to get a repentant heart, and that certainly didn't help the situation. If we can repent immediately, then we can begin the restoration process immediately. And we know that Jesus himself came from this flawed family of David, so we know that good can come from bad. But here's the thing, good can come from good too. So why did David do nothing? Because his personal weakness led to a weakness in his children and ultimately in his kingdom. David failed. So let us learn from his mistakes to prevent a massive fallout in our ministries and congregations. People are going to be looking to us for guidance, and we owe it to them to do our best to represent a Christ-driven life. If we have been called by God into ministry, then God can give us the strength to counter temptation and to rely on him. Sin is a breach of community, and as community builders, we should strive to do everything in our power to make the foundations of our communities strong and resilient.